the Pacific Ocean, and in specific the island of Guam, the far western tip point of the United States into the Pacific Ocean, overlooking countries like China, North and South Korea, Japan, Philippines, Australia, and also Taiwan. Today, I have the pleasure to be talking with Dr. Robert Underwood, who's the chairman of the Pacific Center for Island Security. My name is Dr. Mario Eftimiopoulos. I'm the CEO of Strategy International, and this is Prime Analysis. Dr. Underwood, thank you very much for coming at another web series of Strategy International.
Well, Marius, it's my pleasure, and it's an honor to be with you over there in Cyprus and that part of the world.
Thank you very much, sir. It's very special, the discussion that we're going to have today, because you are located in Guam, in the Pacific Ocean. And over here, in the other side of the earth, we don't know so many things about Guam, and would like to know more. So give us a small overview of the importance of Guam as a geographical area and as the western side, if you want, of the United States.
Right. Well, Guam is technically what is called an unincorporated territory of the United States, which by legal definition is you are owned by the United States, but you're not really part of the United States unless Congress determines whatever relationship they have with you. So Guam is, we think of it as a very small island, but it is very strategically located. And it actually is the largest island between Hawaii and the Philippines. And it's roughly about between 1,500 and 2,000 miles from all the major areas of the Asian region, including it's a 3 to 4 hour flight to Tokyo, same thing to Manila, same thing to Taiwan, and when we used to fly to Shanghai, it's the same thing. So that's Guam. As a U.S. territory since 1898 as a result of the Spanish-American War, its primary purpose for the United States is to fulfill kind of its strategic objectives. So in a military sense. So Guam is a colony, but typically a different kind of colony. It's it's taken for its geographical value and not for any kind of resources or anything that can be extracted from the island.
So what is it?
We have about 160,000 people.
Exactly.
And we are U.S. citizens. And the largest part of the population is the indigenous Chamorro people, of which I'm proud to be a member.
Very good. And I know that is a very important strategic location, considering the events that are taking shape in the Asia region. It is important and it's pivotal for the United States to have a view of what is happening in Asia. Before we're going to go in the next parts, if you want, into the analysis of the events taking place, why don't you tell us a bit, how important is seeing of, the location of Guam vis-a-vis, let's say, the Asia region, in this case, for example, China?
Well, the United States, sometimes Guam is called the tip of the spear because it is the point at which the United States can project its power, its military power, into the Asian region. So it has the largest weapons capacity in Asia. The U.S. has the largest storage for fuel. So it has taken over significant parts of the watershed for the island. So this is a major point for that. And of course, even though you may have U.S. bases that are closer to China, such as may exist in Korea and in Japan, those bases are under sovereign agreements with sovereign states. So in order for the U.S. to use those, they have to have a cooperative or some kind of agreement with those countries. Whereas in Guam, they don't have to tell anybody. They can just use all the assets here, fly
Hmm.
assets in and out. As an example, this week we're having a military exercise called Cope North. And I think there's about 6 different nations that are participating in this military
In the
exercise.
yeah.
So if you look at Guam and you see the wide ocean, so the ocean between here going east to Hawaii is like a wide open field for air exercises, for naval exercises, and the U.S. military sort of maintains a kind of not not official sovereignty, but certainly a present sovereignty over those areas.
Good. Let's go a few years back because one of the things that intrigues me is the opportunities that are given living in an island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So, Dr. Underwood, a young person who starts his life and envisions his future. Where does it start? How do you go ahead with your life, and how do you deliver or develop, if you want, your political life, and also namely your center that you can tell us a few things about?
Sure. And so for me, one of the most important things that I take very valuable is my language. So the
Hmm.
Chamorro language, I'm actually part of a generation, sort of the generation, last generation of Chamorro speakers. People just spoke it naturally. We spoke it in the village. We spoke it at home. And because of that, I became very much involved in language preservation issues and in educational issues related to language and culture. Using that as a pivoting point, I tried to analyze, well, what's going on around me that is making this seem like a real threat to the island, its sustenance, its existence, its culture. And
Hmm.
so I started to dabble in politics, and early on, I was involved in political status conversations. I was an advocate for independence, and that was my life. Then, somewhere along the line, I got involved in regional education training activities throughout the region. So I was in various parts of the surrounding Micronesian region for maybe 15, 20 years working. And so I have a lot of collaborative arrangements with them. Then I decided that I would run for office. And at the time, I ran for to be the congressional delegate from Guam. I remember vividly people saying, if you ever say you're for independence, you'll never get elected to the U.S. Congress. Well, I did. And so I'm always happy that that sort of worked out. And I spent 10 years in Washington, D.C., and I learned a whole lot about Washington, D.C. and politics. And because of my service on the armed services,
Hmm.
House Armed Services, because that's really, and what they call the Resources Committee, which is responsible for the territories and armed services, which is responsible for the military. Through that, I learned a whole lot about the military. I learned about basing strategies. I learned briefings. I was sent to different locations all over the world to examine the military strategic picture. Then I came back to Guam. After 10 years, I was unsuccessful. I ran for governor
Hmm.
and then became president of the university for the next 10 years. And so I spent a lot of my time trying to build up the university, working on STEM fields, again, broadening its regional vision, and also at the same time building support for indigenous cultures and languages. So that's been my trajectory. So as a result of the kind of combination of activities, I've been fortunate enough to, secure presidential appointments. So
Yes.
under the Obama administration, I was on the National Board of Education Sciences. Under the Biden administration, I've been a member of the President's Advisory Council on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. I didn't get a presidential appointment during the Trump administration. That's obviously my political
Yes, yes, yes.
connection.
It shows more with the Democrats, but
So, but that's been my life and trajectory. So, in a way, it's I'm an educator. I'm a teacher by profession, but I'm an activist by heart.
Yes, and
And
it
that's
shows. I mean, it makes sense very much in the indigenousy element, which I thought initially when somebody thinks of such places like Guam, the indigenous people it matters, and the language and the culture and the civilization that comes with it. And I think it's very important, especially in a very much globalized world. Hence, also our discussions, because we in this part of the world would like to learn more about what is happening in the Pacific, but also the combination, if you want, with the indigenous people and how it affects them. For example, we recently in Abu Dhabi they had the COP 28, for example, on climate change. So climate affects a lot islands such as Guam. Um,
oh yeah.
so um, how do people envision, if you want, climate threats at this stage?
So for us, of course, the immediate threat is to low-lying islands and to atoll nations like the Marshalls and Kiribati. And fortunately, in my work, I've been able to work with the former president of Kiribati,
Hmm.
and I've been a longtime friend of former president and now current president again, Hilda Heine of the Republic of the Marshall Islands. So for us, the issue, of course, is it changes the natural environment.
Yeah,
Coral reefs, which are the lifeblood of the ecosystem out here,
exactly.
have a very narrow temperature range in which they can exist. So what's going on is that with the increase in the water temperature, there's bleaching, coral bleaching, and so we have to kind of monitor that and figure that out. But the human impact is really more climate change refugees because we
Yeah,
have so many people who
that are,
live within a few hundred miles of Guam who live on low-lying atolls. And where are they going to go? Because Guam is like the metropole for this region. It's
yes,
like
yes,
New
yes,
York City for Micronesia.
yes, 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 yes.
It's kind of hard to say that, but it's a transportation hub, it's a shipping hub, huge military facilities. Everything around this area seems to go through Guam. So
How do you?
the people impact
Yeah.
really is climate refugees.
Can I ask you something? Having said that, I was always wondering. I remember through also my studies, how do small nations or small areas or islands, uh, let's say in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, explain to the rest of the world that climate change, because the degradation of climate is global, it's not just one area, it happens all over, but major cities which have they're destroying the natural habitat, CO2 emissions, a combination, if you want, of things. They're actually, degrading the total environment. How do you explain to the world, to the majority of the population of the 7.5 billion people that we are at this point, that what you're doing has an impact in my area, in my nation, in my island, which probably I don't think we would understand that unless we would actually go and see it ourselves. So how do you explain to them, what is happening?
Well, it's very difficult because they're focused more on, of course, the changes that they're experiencing. They're generating all the heat, but they're not suffering from all the heat.
Yes,
And
yes.
so we're the ones that are, in a way, we're like the canary in the, proverbial canary in the gold mine. You know that there's poison gas in the gold mine because the canary starts to die. So we're the ones that are experiencing that. And in spite of like very forceful presentations by people like Hilda Heine from the Marshalls in COP 28, she went to COP 28, was disappointed, and resigned as a chair of one of the committees there, simply because they were not listening. And so this is a and between for us, between the United States is now, ironically, the leading fossil fuel producer in the world today. They're producing more oil than any other country in the world today as we speak. And then in Australia, they're doing the same thing, and they're using coal and exporting coal and exporting natural gas. And those are really destructive elements to our environment. It's very hard to catch their attention, but we try to do so as much as we can.
I mean, being in an island in a country like Cyprus, also, which is an island in the middle of the Eastern Mediterranean, whatever happens in terms of climate has an effect also into Cyprus itself. So that also matters on the way that the coordination between what I call as small nations and small islands can actually get together and through the UN probably engage into something that makes more sense. But I believe that your choices over your years of service and your years of experience has led to you to create also a policy center, which we also hope that we're going to have a collaboration between us too.
Well, I certainly hope so. We've organized the Pacific Center for Island Security. And what we're hoping to do through this process is to establish a island-based, island-centric think tank so that we're not just seen as pawns on a big chessboard, but that we actually have a perspective that would be useful to help ameliorate maybe some of the potential conflicts that we face in this part of the world.
Yes, and I guess we're going to go now in a few steps into the analysis of the region, but things are not looking that good in 2024 overall in the world. Wars seem to be multiplying. Existing wars seem to be continuing deeper and deeper with much destruction and much hate. And also, it seems that there is competition, which over the last decade, I would say, not now, but lately has been also stepping up in the Asia region. And that, I presume, also affects you. In what capacity, what is happening? If you can give us, if you want, an introductory part with different countries, and we'll go with a bilateral, if you want, relations. But what is happening in that part of the world at this point?
Well, obviously, the thing that's catching the most attention, and deservedly so, is the geostrategic competition between China and the United States. So, for us, for Guam, as being a territory of the United States, it's an awkward conversation because we're not a sovereign entity, but we are really the linchpin of that advancement of the U.S. Strategic picture out here. So, but we do have freely associated states that are around us, independent nations that are sort of being pushed around, into this. Either you choose China or you choose the United States. And I think most of them have intelligently said, we choose ourselves. We're not choosing sides. We're choosing our best interests. But that's a very difficult decision-making process because there's so many different kinds of inducements and enticements. China has ramped up a lot of projects. They're well known for establishing capital improvement projects. Will come, they'll build you a stadium, they'll come and build you a center. The United States is a little bit different. We'll come and give you some economic aid, or we'll come and we'll do this. And the United States has admittedly ignored the island Pacific for years. They don't even have embassies in many of the independent island states. So for the past couple of years, the Biden administration has attempted to rectify that by having a Pacific Island Summit at the White House. And that's the first time that's been done. But as usual, as from the island perspective, those things are over-promising and under-delivering. So,
But
a
as
lot of
I
commitments are made, but the
as
money's
I
not.
as I saw recently, there was an announcement by the White House on also your appointment on this group of experts, considering also as counselors, if you want, to Joe Biden and his administration. Am I right?
Well, yeah, those are on domestic issues, but I was also involved in the Institute of Peace, which is a kind of a defense
Mm-hmm.
think tank, and
Yes.
in that group, I was co-chair of a report about the impact of this geostrategic competition on the compacts of free association for the Marshall Islands, the Federated States of
Mm-hmm.
Micronesia, and Palau. So those are those are enormous aid packages between the United States and those three nations. And of course, they're being held up right now because nothing is happening in Congress. And in the meantime, so when you put those things together, like what's happening in these compact states with what's happening in the Middle East with what's happening in the Ukraine,
Yeah, it's
uh, the
engagement.
the
Definitely.
whole picture is all connected, but people don't see how the parts are connected.
Yes.
And that's why I think it's really important for a voice like yours and for a voice like ours to be able to present that to the
Yes,
world.
I completely agree because I firmly believe personally also as a scientist, but also a strategy that all things are globally connected with each other. What is happening in the Middle East has an effect in the Asia region. The way that China is treating their neighbors and their neighbors, China, has an effect, if you want, considering what they examine and analyze with regards to the Western world from their side. The United States is truly engaged in the Middle East at this point, in Africa, in Europe, in the war in Russia and Ukraine, and, in Israel, Gaza, and this affects a lot the decision making. And elections are also coming in the United States. So
That's right.
my next question to you is: what happens if Biden or the Biden administration does not continue and a new president is elected? And what happens if Joe Biden is elected again, as an example?
Well, I think if Joe Biden is reelected, of course, then we'll have a little bit more stability and domestically in the United States. The election of Donald Trump, the potential election of Donald Trump, brings not necessarily a defined set of different policies, but instability, uncertainty, kind of like we're not sure how they would react. So those are things that create uncertainty, and of course, that level of uncertainty. For example, in this part of the world, for a long time, everyone was concerned about Kim Jong Un and the development of missiles, which Kim Jong Un said, initially we can hit Guam now, and
Yes, he said
then
that.
they
Yeah.
threatened we can hit Guam. So now they're saying they can hit Seattle. I don't know, but uh, so the attempt of Donald Trump during his presidency to resolve that, in my estimation, was based on photo ops, but nothing. So
Mhm.
nothing has changed in terms of Kim Jong Un's behavior or disruptive nature in this part of the world. And as a consequence of that, the lack of understanding and the potential for misunderstanding is enhanced, and therefore that's when kinetic warfare breaks out,
I think
mostly with big
I
powers. With big powers,
I think
yeah.
during the Trump administration, if I recall, in the discussion with the North Koreans, I think the biggest winner was Hanoi, because everything was happening in Vietnam, and Vietnam has a development rate of 16% per year. So
Well,
suddenly,
yeah,
they found some sort of balance, which also seemed to be the case in the Philippines as well, where they found a balance between the two major powers, China and the United States, where they trade with both, they win out of both do investments, both do loanings, both do good trade. And somehow, I think the big winner in that case, if you want, with regards to North Korea and Donald Trump at that time, the government of Donald Trump at that time at least, was I think it was
yeah,
Vietnam, because Vietnam was suddenly put in the world map as a place for negotiations.
yeah,
So that was important for them, and then you see the order of new planes, Airbuses, Boeing's, and so on and so forth. You see the development, you see the tourist element going up, trade ports being important, and so on and so forth. So let me just go back, if you want, so we can explore a few things with regard to bilateral relations. You said North. I'll start with North Korea and Guam, because that's interesting. At some point, in fact, Kim Jong Un said, "Yes, we have the capability to hit Guam." When you heard that, 165,000 people, an island, nowhere to go in case somebody shoot it,
yeah.
missiles you. Um,
Right.
what is your initial reaction? What is the initial reaction of people? Was it like he's crazy, or fear, or laughing out
Fear,
loud? Fear.
fear. Some of this is based upon the experience of the island during World War II, of course, which was pretty
Yes, yes,
tragic. But the fear, it's like trying to understand if you are potentially the main power projection point for the United States and you are vulnerable, is the United States doing everything they can to protect you? Or is the United States, or is their very presence the fact that you're being threatened? So I would say about 6 or 7 years ago, Kim Jong Un kept making these threats. It was nearing his birthday, which always seems
yes,
to
yes,
have coalesced with a lot
yes,
of other things going on. And he kept, and literally there was panic on the island. Schools were let out that day because there was the assumption that this was a real possibility. It never really was, and I think almost anybody who really kind of understood it was trying to counsel, patients and to understand that this threat was not real. But again, the people of Guam are being sort of their sense of fear, their sense of trepidation is being used in order to then therefore build up more military facilities here instead of having the opposite effect. Normally, if you think that because of the presence of the military in your backyard is making you a target, you want to figure out how can you do this differently. But the military is arguing that the more military we have, the better protected you are, rather than the bigger
yeah.
target you become. And that's tough. That really is a tough political issue to sort out.
Yes, because on the one hand, you cannot take double chances and not build up in case there is a threat.
Well,
And
and
you
then
know,
and then you have to analyze like,
but yeah,
well, if we're being threatened with missiles from China, and there's all kinds of things that are going on, all kinds of videos on YouTube, the Guam killer missile positing these attacks on Guam. Are you going to build any defense shelters? No, that's not our job. Our job is not to build defense shelters, but
yes,
they're building defense shelters on the base, but they're not building them in the civilian
yeah,
community.
probably
So,
because the military asset has in its own case the shelter. Because eventually, if somebody fires, they will fire on military installations. They're not going to fire. I mean, supposedly so. But Guam,
yeah, but the island is not so big.
exactly. That's
That's
that's what I
that's the
want to say.
problem.
Yes,
The problem
yes.
is,
What are what are what are
everybody here lives within 5 miles of a
ex-
military facility.
exactly. So what you mentioned at some point World War II, and maybe a lot of young generation people who are watching this may not know that Guam played a pivotal role in World War II. What
Yeah, that's right.
are the lessons to be learned from the use or utility, or and how people reacted during World War II? What are the lessons to be learned in comparison to today's threats, whether this is from North Korea or China or else?
Well, of course, Guam was occupied by the Japanese during World War II. It was, not a good time, and lots of people, several people were executed. There were massacres. There were things that were going on that were very unpleasant. So there was this whole kind of feeling that, the U.S. forces landed and liberated us.
Hmm.
But right after the liberation, the U.S. forces then sort of took advantage of that sense of liberation, built a whole bunch of military facilities, took three-fourths of the land, did everything they could under the logic of winning the war against Japan in the
Hmm.
remaining years of World War II. But in actuality, those became permanent military facilities in the emerging Cold War. So now, all of a sudden, whereas before World War II, the military was a military government, but actual military presence was very minimal. After World War II, the military actually was larger than the civilian population. And that continued. And so Guam's use was in the Cold War as a point from which to fight the Vietnam War, in which troops moved through here, Korean War, Vietnam War, bombing Vietnam with B-52s. All of these dimensions about Guam were all connected with the military, and at the same time, the sense of island security. That's why we're trying to figure out what is really the nub of island security. Is the nub of island security more military facilities? And if they are, what are those military facilities? What are
Right.
those activities? I have to say that right now, because Guam is a hot commodity in terms of this geostrategic competition, inside the Pentagon, everybody who has any kind of project that they're working on will try to put a Guam angle on it so that it can get funded. And we're literally, we're constantly being visitors are coming to the island. Different parts of the Pentagon are coming to the island, talking about different things, ranging from micro nuclear reactors to laser beams to satellite stations to a whole network of air missile defense systems.
Can I ask you something? Your biggest then suddenly income may not be tourists, but actually the utility of the national land from the U.S. military forces and the consumption with the daily consumption of the armed officers or the officers
Yeah.
in general in the everyday life of Guam. Does this offer any kind of capital with which a whole industry of services is created within Guam? Like from the military
Well,
point of view, like you said that all this military, installations and all this human capital that is there, they consume, right? So they spend time in Guam. They probably invest something. They spend their money. Is this like does this balance a bit, if you want, the economy of Guam, if you want?
Well, the people who are most interested in military activity are realtors and construction companies. So they kind of benefit in the immediate short run. But
Hmm.
in reality, the military community shops on their own stores
Hmm.
and they kind of remain a separate element of society. And because of the largesse of the military, they pervert, they skew the nature of housing opportunities in Guam, so that the cost of housing has risen by about 30% in the past 5 years, and it continues to go up, and so the average young person today has very little opportunity to see how they're going to get a home, how they're going to
Hmm.
get a house, not and they're not working for the military, so it's a kind of a misnomer if you look at it. The military will say that they're spending, for example, the missile defense system, they're spending $45 billion on it. So they'll say they're spending $45 billion on Guam, but they're not really spending that money in Guam. They're giving it to contractors to develop the systems. And at the very tail end, there may be some minimal activity here in Guam. So the militarized economy is a significant part of the economy already, but I think its value is overstated. But we have to take a look at that. You're right. So, the twin pillars of Guam's economy have historically been military, federal
Hmm.
spending, and tourism.
Going to tourism, if you want, because I think we're going to come back to the military spending when it will come down to China, because I think China utilizes exactly this sort of argumentation that the U.S. is building up military power, and this is their excuse in order to build their own military capabilities, if you want. One of the excuses that they have, but we'll come back to this. But you mentioned tourism now in the end, and I wanted to proceed, if you want, to the tourism element. Before we started recording, you mentioned that the South Koreans are some of the biggest tourists, which actually do come to Guam. How how
That's
did this develop? How did this come by?
Well, yeah, initially the Japanese market was by far the largest market, followed by South Korea. But since COVID, it's sort of switched around, and the Koreans, it's really a mark of the Korean economy.
Hmm.
The strength of the Korean economy, that they have the disposable income to travel. The Japanese economy uh, is not as strong. And of course, the Japanese have other options to go to tropical areas. They can go to Okinawa.
Yeah,
So, if the yen is weak, why would you convert that to US
into
dollars
dollar.
and go to Guam when you can just go to Okinawa? and get, and so the Koreans don't have that kind of option. And so they come to Guam. And so, but the nature of tourism has also changed. So the value of it is not as it once was. They're not buying luxury goods, and they go to the store and buy a cup of noodles instead of going to a restaurant. And
Yes.
so it's not as big an impact. And especially with many people in the Korean market, you're talking about younger tourists who are backpackers.
Right. What about Japanese? Considering, I mean, you mentioned them a couple of times. You said they prefer to go to Okinawa, depending on the yen. But I'm looking more from the historical perspective. They did all these atrocities in Guam. We don't know if they paid their dues back, but nevertheless, right now things are different. We are not at a level where we are building, if you want, new relationships through trade and through tourism. What does and why does the average Japanese would go to Guam for?
Yeah, well, the average, we're talking primarily about budget tourists, because if they have a lot of money, they'll go to the U.S. or they might go to Europe. But we're talking about kind of like budget tourists, people who want to go someplace for 3 or 4 days, and they can come here, have a package tour, and it's be affordable and get a little bit of fun and
Mhm.
get a little bit of cultural
Yeah.
knowledge, a little bit of, and that's basically it.
Do they
And
do they ask do they ask
the
do they
legacy of World War II.
yeah,
Most of these Japanese don't know anything, or they haven't been taught, or if
yeah,
they
yeah.
were, they ignored what they did in World War II. And most people here have also forgotten. It's kind of moved on beyond that.
Interesting to say. What about the Australians and the Philippines in that case? I would take both.
Yeah. Well, the Australians are a little bit far off, and there's no direct flights.
Yes, yes.
The Philippines, there's a lot of direct flights, and of course, a significant part of the population of Guam is Filipino because of the in-migration. So there's a lot of back and forth going between here and the Philippines, and the Philippines is actually a medical center for people with complicated illnesses. You go to the Philippines, maybe you go to Taiwan, but you go to the Philippines because they advertise. They advertise. If you have any kind of illnesses, come to the Philippines, and they
Wi-
have pretty good medical facilities.
And I presume you fly with United Airlines from Guam to the
United,
Philippines?
Philippine Airlines. United is the main carrier here, but not Koreans have two different airlines that are budget airlines, and they're always full.
Interesting. That's very interesting to say. And I'll keep the most interesting part that, the big, if you want, Western from Guam power that seeks to overcome all these other powers, China. How does China see Guam, U.S. presence, the far western tip point, if we can say that, of the United States, and having into knowledge that North Korea wants to bomb Guam for their own reasons?
Well, I think the Chinese presence here in Guam, well, there's not a large Chinese community, but most of some are from the People's Republic, and some are from most are from Taiwan. Sort of hard
Hmm.
to sort out. But the Northern Marianas, it's kind of an interesting anomalous status. The Northern Marianas, which is also a U.S. territory and within 100 miles of here, they still get tourists directly from China. So there's a kind of an influence, and they had tried to build a big mega casino there. So there's that influence there. So that economic influence is around.
It's
When
vivid,
I
yeah.
was president of the university, we put out an RFP for construction. There'd always be some state-owned enterprise that would bid on it. So the Chinese economic presence is small, but it's around, and so they don't have a direct presence here per se. They don't even have a council, of any sort
Yeah, trade
working
council
here.
or
But you can tell that they're here. You can tell that they're here.
very interesting. Taiwan. You mentioned Taiwan. Taiwanese want their independence. The United States has multiple times stated to China that we will not allow Taiwan to be overcome by China. Taiwan is considered as an independent state by the United States. Taiwan is considered part of China to the Chinese. Joint military exercises in combination, if you want, with the Pacific fleet. Um, what do you make out of this? Because it seems that the Taiwanese are they're feeling very insecure, I would say, for the possible
Yeah.
volatility that things, how things can develop, also considering the multiplication on wars in the other parts of the world.
Well, so the Taiwan government has a strong presence here in Guam, and they have, they also have a strong presence in Palau and
Hmm.
in the Marshall Islands, where they are officially recognized. The Federated States of Micronesia recognizes the China People's Republic, but these other nations recognize Taiwan. So I would say that the people in Guam are emotionally connected to the Taiwan, and also because there's a substantial Chinese community from Taiwan here. But we've had good relationships. There's a visa waiver. Tourists can come from Taiwan here directly with no issues. So that's a kind of a positive relationship. But compared to China, the scale is you know it's just not it's not comparable.
So, considering the immigration laws, for example, if a tourist would have come to Guam to visit, they would be like entering the U.S. soil. So they would have an immigration desk.
That's
They would
that's
need, for those that are visa waiver free, they would do their ESTAs, or otherwise they would do any kind of other visa application to go to Guam. Am I right?
That's right.
Right,
So
right, right.
Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan all have visa waivers. The other countries do not. And China has a kind of a modified visa waiver system
Hmm.
to go to Saipan, but not to Guam. And so they've just they're prosecuting people right now in federal court in the Northern Marianas for people trying to take some of these Chinese tourists and then take a boat and take them to Guam. So there's that
Yeah,
dimension as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
But the Chinese, of course, are able to, if they were allowed to come in, they would literally swamp the place
Really.
because they will travel and there's lots of them.
Well,
And they have money. Now, the ones with money will come.
yes, yes, because they would like to make it as a small hub for them to have
That's right.
comfortable
And
vacations
and
or
and,
stay.
and that's what happened in Palau, where the Chinese tourists simply almost overwhelmed the capacity of Palau to deal with tourism.
Very interesting. Dr. Underwood, a final question, and with this we will wrap up our discussion. What do you think? How do you think 2024 is looking to be, evolve? How things will evolve, considering all these discussions? We have more than 62 national elections around the world at the same time, plus EU elections. You have wars pending. You have wars being taken. Wars pending solution, any kind of solution, which they don't seem to have a solution. You have a multiplication in different micro wars in different areas, whether it's Central Asia or Africa. There's still issues in the south of Philippines. Other countries like Vietnam, for example, they're trying to put a pinch in the world that's saying we want to be stable, we want to be safe. China and North Korea look like they want to, expand everywhere and keep everybody engaged under their own understandings and rules. The United States is going into national elections. Again, the main questions about Guam persists, no matter which administration will be elected. What do you think the outcome and the development within 2024 can be? Is it more peaceful? Is it more volatile? Do we need to make more analysis of this? What do you think will be?
Well, what you have outlined sounds pretty dispiriting. So it's very difficult to be kind of optimistic given the nature of the challenges. So, my perspective on all of that is that you really have to go down to analyzing this at a different level. And you can see where competition is most direct. Geostrategic competition is most direct in small islands. So what is going on in small islands is really a precursor of what will go on in the larger world. And so that's the basis for that analysis. So,
Absolutely.
I think probably Cyprus shares some of that.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
it's kind of like underappreciated for what contribution it can make to the understanding of larger trends. Because, we're not going to make any difference in terms of trade agreements, or we don't have the scale to engage in that. But we do have the capacity to understand what has happened to us and to see how volatile and the volatility of these events seem to fall on the lesser people of the world, the people that are not as powerful, are not going to experience this. So for us, it is trying to use what is the unit of analysis for understanding the world. And I hope that we can make a contribution in that. Island states, island nations, just islands, have a different rhythm. They have a different
Absolutely.
cadence. They have a
Absolutely.
different understanding of who they are. They're vulnerable, yes, but in their vulnerabilities, they've learned to do things in
Mhm.
a different way. They've learned to accommodate, they've learned to understand, and they've learned to appreciate. So, of course, in the big scene, a lot depends on who becomes president of the United States. Also, we don't know the role of AI and all of these
Oh yeah,
campaigns, all these
technology.
elections that are ongoing are going to be, someone is going to be making mischief constantly. So we have to be on guard for that. Hence, hence, I believe that the role of think tanks and the role of individuals like yourself is actually enhanced. Because how else are we going to understand what's fully going on around us in a way that is not just intelligent and analytical, but in a way that is not doesn't have a vested interest. You
Right.
don't have a vested interest per se, other than seeing the world be a little bit more peaceful.
Exactly. And I think, Dr. Underwood, by saying your last words and utilizing your last words, the mere fact that you have established a think tank for us is very important. Exactly because we don't have an invested interest, but we want the world to understand how global elements are bonded together in their
Mhm.
larger, if you want, chessboard. That we need to make sure that, as you said, island nations, islands themselves, they actually have a very different characteristic of engaging into the world affairs, considering that they're probably, as a characteristics, they're located in between different worlds, so they're cross worlds.
That's right. That's right.
And they're affected from the west, from the east, from the north, from the south. They're affected to this. Uh, Over time, history has shown that small islands have been utilized by colonies, by empires, by different civilizations that have made an impact to the indigenous people as well. And I think also Cyprus shares this characteristic. If you see the inner elements, the civilizational elements of Cyprus, you will distinguish a lot of civilizations that passed through, that left their identity, architecture, design, foods, religions, and so on and so forth. And that has made an impact to the way that the island thinks. People think scientifically or everyday life, people, entrepreneurs, business people. And as you said, the islands will somehow make it. The island people will somehow make it. They understand that whatever happens, they will have to make it within this complexity, if you want, in this part of the world. So,
Because they've already made it.
yes, yes, they
That's the
already made
point.
it. Yes, exactly, exactly. They've
Historically,
already made it.
historically, they've
Yes,
already
yes,
made
yes,
it.
yes,
So,
absolutely.
what lessons can we continue to learn from that experience?
Absolutely,
That's
absolutely.
that's and if you're sitting on the point of a Tomahawk missile here in Guam, or the Belt and Road Initiative, well, in a way, you've seen this. You've seen this play before.
Yes, yes.
And we're still here.
Yes,
We're
absolutely. And
still
we
here.
will be here. We will be here.
And we will be
We
here,
will be here.
even into 2025.
Absolutely, and we're looking very much forward, hopefully having you both here, and somehow joining forces together in the near future to come, with your work and your very good work, with your center, with your universities, with your contribution, if you want, to the society, and to the U.S. society as well, not only Guam. But we also look forward having a very good collaboration between us. So
Yes, I look forward to it very much.
thank you very much, Dr. Underwood, for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining another web series of Strategy International's Prime Analysis. And we do look forward in our next discussion to be hopefully physical, in person.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Underwood.
Guam and Cyprus.
Excellent. Absolutely. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for watching another web series of Strategy International's Prime Analysis. Please like, share, subscribe, and follow into our social media. My name is Dr. Marios Eftimiopoulos, and I'm the CEO of Strategy International. And remember, impact makes a difference.